The photograph is small, no larger than a calling card. Its edges have browned with age, curling inward like the fingers of a dying hand. It was taken in the autumn of 1863, a collodion wet plate process, the kind that required the subject to remain perfectly still for several seconds. In the image, you see the front facade of Enfield Manor, a Georgian estate house in the parish of Waltham Cross, Hertfordshire. The brickwork is dark. The windows are darker. Two figures stand near the entrance, a man and a woman, presumably the owners at the time, Mr. and Mrs. Josiah Pemberton Hale. They are rigid, formal, unremarkable. But there is a third element in this photograph, and it is the reason the image was sealed inside a wax paper envelope and stored in the restricted collection of the Hertfordshire County Archive for over 100 years. In the second-floor window, the leftmost pane, there is a hand. Not a face, not a figure. Just a hand. It is pressed flat against the glass from the inside. The fingers are splayed wide, and the hand appears to have 6 fingers. Not 5. 6. The additional digit extends from the outer edge of the palm, slightly longer than the smallest finger, bending at an angle that suggests a fully formed joint. At first glance, you might dismiss it as a photographic artifact, a flaw in the emulsion, a trick of the collodion. But when the image was examined in 1971 by Dr. Alistair Fenwick of the Royal Photographic Society, he noted something unsettling. The hand casts a shadow consistent with the angle of afternoon light entering the room. Artifacts do not cast shadows. Emulsion flaws do not obey the laws of optics. And according to every record available, the second floor of Enfield Manor had been locked and sealed for 11 months prior to the photograph being taken. No one was inside that room. No one with 5 fingers. And certainly, no one with 6. To understand what happened at Enfield Manor, you must first understand the world in which it happened. 1863. England was deep in the grip of the Victorian-era, a time of extraordinary contradiction. On one hand, the empire was expanding. Industry was roaring. The Great Exhibition had already dazzled the world with its crystal palace of progress. On the other hand, the streets of London smelled of horse dung and coal smoke, and the sweet, rotting stench of the Thames, which still carried raw sewage through the heart of the city. Cholera had swept through just 5 years earlier. The miasma theory of disease still held sway in many medical circles, though John Snow's work on waterborne transmission was beginning to gain reluctant acceptance. Surgeons operated without gloves. Anesthesia was administered with a rag and a bottle of chloroform. The concept of antisepsis was still 3 years away from Joseph Lister's first experiments. And yet, in the parlors of the educated classes, a different kind of inquiry was flourishing. Spiritualism. It had crossed the Atlantic from America in the 1850s and taken root in British society with remarkable speed. Seances were held in drawing rooms. Mediums were consulted by members of Parliament. The Society for Psychical Research would not be formally established for another 2 decades, but its intellectual precursors were already active, already meticulously documented in their methods. Photography, still in its relative infancy, was seen as both a tool of science and a potential window into the unseen. The camera, after all, could capture what the eye could not. Long exposures revealed motion as blur. Chemical processes rendered light itself into permanent form. If the camera could freeze time, some reasoned, perhaps it could also freeze the invisible. Spirit photography was already a growing and deeply controversial practice. It was into this atmosphere, this volatile mixture of empirical ambition and supernatural anxiety, that the events at Enfield Manor emerged. Not from the seance table, not from a medium's trance, but from a locked room on the second floor of a country house where something began to draw. Her name was Miss Constance Adelaide Pemberton Hale. She was 23 years old in the autumn of 1863, the only surviving child of Josiah and Eleanor Pemberton Hale. By all accounts, she was an unremarkable woman of her class and time. She played the pianoforte with competence, but not brilliance. She read French adequately. She attended church on Sundays and embroidered on weekday afternoons. Her father managed a modest portfolio of land holdings. Her mother suffered from what the family physician, Dr. Edmund Hartley Graves, described in his notes as nervous exhaustion of the feminine constitution, a common and conveniently vague diagnosis of the era. Constance herself had no history of illness, no episodes of hysteria, no fainting spells, no fits. She was, in the language of the time, sound. But she had one particular quality that would later become central to the investigation. She could not draw. This was not a matter of modesty. It was a matter of documented fact. Her governess, a Miss Prudence Whitmore, had noted in a letter to a colleague in 1859 that Constance possesses no facility whatsoever for the pictorial arts. Her hand trembles at the pencil. Her lines are crude. I have abandoned instruction in this area entirely. Dr. Hartley Graves himself observed in his clinical notes that Constance displayed a mild but persistent tremor in her right hand, likely congenital, which made fine motor tasks, particularly writing and drawing, difficult and at times impossible. He described the condition using the term then current, scribal palsy of the peripheral nerves. She could hold a teacup. She could turn the pages of a book. But she could not control a pencil with any precision. This fact, this small, clinical, meticulously documented fact, is what makes everything that followed so deeply, so profoundly, inexplicable. The first anomaly occurred on the 14th of October, 1863. It was a Wednesday. The household maid, a woman named Agnes Poole, entered Constance's bedroom at 7:30 in the morning to open the curtains and lay out the wash basin. She found Constance sitting upright in bed. Her eyes were open. Her right hand was moving. In her hand was a pencil, a graphite drawing pencil of the kind used by architectural draftsmen. Constance did not own such a pencil. No one in the household did. On her lap was a sheet of paper, and on the paper was a drawing. Agnes Poole later described it in a sworn statement to the parish constable as a picture of the house, sir, but seen from above, as if drawn by a bird in flight. The drawing depicted Enfield Manor from an aerial perspective: the roof, the chimneys, the garden paths, the stable block to the east. Every detail was precise. Every line was clean. Every proportion was architecturally accurate. Constance appeared to be in a state of partial wakefulness. She did not respond to Agnes's voice. Her pupils were dilated. Her breathing was shallow but regular. And her right hand, the hand with the documented tremor, the hand that could not draw a straight line, was moving with absolute, mechanical precision. Agnes ran to fetch Dr. Hartley Graves, who arrived within the hour. By the time he reached the bedroom, Constance had stopped drawing. She was confused, disoriented. She had no memory of the act. She looked at the drawing and wept. Not from fear, from bewilderment. Dr. Hartley Graves examined her hand. He tested her grip strength. He asked her to write her name. The tremor was present, as it had always been. Her signature was shaky, uneven, barely legible. He then placed the drawing beside the signature and noted in his journal the following words: "These two marks cannot have been made by the same hand." And yet I watched her hold the pencil. I saw the graphite on her fingers. The impossibility is complete. Over the following 6 weeks, the episodes continued, and they escalated. always between the hours of 3 and 5 in the morning, always in the same state of partial consciousness, always with the same architectural pencil, which could never be found during waking hours, but appeared, without explanation, in Constance's hand during the episodes. The drawings became more complex. The second, produced on October 19th, depicted the interior floor plan of Enfield Manor's ground level. Every room, every doorway, every load-bearing wall. It was accurate to within fractions of an inch when later compared to the original builder's plans held at the Hertfordshire Land Registry. The third, on October 26th, showed the cellar. Enfield Manor's cellar had been sealed since 1841, following a partial collapse of the eastern foundation wall. No one living had been inside it for over 20 years. And yet the drawing showed details that were later confirmed when the cellar was finally reopened. In 1909, the position of a bricked-up archway, the location of an old well shaft, and the presence of a narrow passage leading north toward the churchyard. Constance could not have known these things. No one could have. Dr. Hartley Graves, now deeply alarmed, invited a colleague to observe. Dr. Reginald Fothergill Shaw, a lecturer in nervous diseases at St. Bartholomew's Hospital, London, arrived on the 3rd of November. He brought with him a portable sphygmograph, an early device for recording pulse rate and arterial pressure. During the episode of November 5th, Dr. Fothergill Shaw attached the device to Constance's left wrist while her right hand drew. The results were, in his words, physiologically incoherent. Her resting pulse was recorded at 41 beats per minute, dangerously low. The pulse of a body in deep hibernation, not a body engaged in fine motor activity. Her skin temperature, measured by mercury thermometer at the fingertips of her drawing hand, was 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The room temperature was 54. Her drawing hand was warmer than the air around it by 14 degrees. Her left hand, by contrast, was cold, nearly the same temperature as the room. Dr. Fothergill Shaw noted that the asymmetry of thermal distribution was unlike anything recorded in the clinical literature on somnambulism, catalepsy, or hysterical paralysis. He wrote in his report, submitted to the Medical Society of London on November 20th, 1863. It is as though the right hand belongs to a different body entirely, a body that is present in the room but is not Miss Pemberton Hale's. The drawings themselves were submitted for analysis by Mr. George Whitfield Cavendish, a civil engineer and Fellow of the Royal Institute of British Architects. His assessment was unequivocal. The draftsmanship, he wrote, is consistent with a trained architectural hand of considerable experience. The use of perspective, the precision of scale, the confidence of line. These are not the marks of an amateur. They are the marks of a professional who has drawn buildings for decades. He estimated the skill level as equivalent to a senior draftsman with no fewer than 20 years of practice. Constance was 23. She had never held a drafting pencil in her conscious life. Father Ambrose Clement, the parish vicar of Waltham Cross, was invited to observe on November 12th. He watched in silence as Constance's hand moved across the paper in the candlelight. Afterward, he refused to sign the witness statement prepared by Dr. Hartley Graves, not because he doubted what he had seen, but because, as he later confided to his bishop, he was afraid that signing it would make it real. The final episode occurred on the 29th of November, 1863. Dr. Hartley Graves and Dr. Fothergill Shaw had arranged for a photographer, Mr. Lawrence Jessup of the Jessup Photographic Studio in Enfield Town, to be present in the room with his equipment, prepared to capture the act of drawing as it occurred. The camera was set. The collodion plate was prepared. The magnesium flash powder was measured. At approximately 3:40 in the morning, Constance's hand began to move. But this time, it did not draw a building. It drew a hand, a left hand. Seen from above, as if the viewer were looking down at their own hand resting on a table. The hand in the drawing had 6 fingers. Mr. Jessup ignited the flash powder. The room filled with white light. And Constance screamed. It was the first sound she had ever made during an episode. Dr. Fothergill Shaw later described the scream as not a woman's voice, but a sound like tearing metal passed through a human throat. The pencil in her hand snapped in 2. The paper caught fire. Not from the flash. The flash was 6 feet away. The paper simply ignited, from the center outward, as if the graphite itself had become an accelerant. Dr. Hartley Graves seized the burning page and threw it into the wash basin. Mr. Jessup stumbled backward, knocking his camera from its tripod. The glass plate shattered on the floor. When the confusion subsided, Constance was unconscious. Her pulse was undetectable for nearly 30 seconds before resuming at a rate of 160 beats per minute. Her right hand was burned, not from the fire. The burns were on the inside of her fingers, as if she had been gripping something impossibly hot. The graphite pencil fragments were later found to be fused. The wood had carbonized. The graphite core had partially vitrified, a process requiring temperatures in excess of 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. No source of such heat was present in the room. No source of such heat existed in 1863 outside of an industrial blast furnace. The only photograph taken that night was the one that survived. The exterior image of Enfield Manor, taken by Mr. Jessup earlier that evening as a test exposure. The one with the hand in the window, the 6-fingered hand. Constance Adelaide Pemberton Hale never drew again. In the weeks following the final episode, she developed what Dr. Hartley Graves described as progressive aphasia of the motor faculties, a gradual loss of voluntary movement beginning in the right hand and spreading to the arm, the shoulder, and eventually the right side of her face. By January of 1864, she could no longer walk unaided. By March, she could no longer speak. She was moved to a private sanatorium in Buckinghamshire, the Graymore Institute for Nervous Complaints, where she remained for the rest of her life. She died on the 11th of February, 1879. She was 38 years old. The cause of death was recorded as general paralysis of the insane, a common catch-all diagnosis of the era. Her medical records from Graymore were sealed by the Institute's Board of Governors and were reportedly destroyed in a fire that consumed the building's east wing in 1912. Enfield Manor itself passed through several owners after Josiah Pemberton Hale's death in 1871. The second floor was never reopened during the family's tenure. In 1909, the new owners, a Mr. and Mrs. Aldous Fairweather, commissioned renovations and finally unsealed the upper rooms. The workmen found nothing unusual, except for one detail. On the interior surface of the leftmost window pane, the same window visible in Jessup's photograph, there were marks in the glass. Not scratches, not etchings, impressions, as if a hand had been pressed against the glass with such force and such heat that the surface had softened and retained the shape. The impression showed 6 fingers. The glass was removed and sent to the British Museum for analysis. The museum's records indicate it was received on the 14th of June, 1909. There is no record of it after that. Enfield Manor was demolished in 1938 to make way for a munitions storage facility during the lead-up to the Second World War. Nothing remains of the building today. Nothing except the photograph and the questions it refuses to answer. In 2017, Dr. Cian Morley Ashworth of the University of Edinburgh's Department of Anomalous Cognition Studies published a paper in the Journal of Parapsychological Research titled Involuntary Expertise: Savant State Phenomena and the Problem of Exogenous Motor Intelligence. In it, she examined 14 historical cases of individuals who, under altered states of consciousness, demonstrated skills they had never learned and could not replicate while awake. The Pemberton Hale case was her primary example. Her conclusion was careful, measured, and deeply unsettling. She wrote, "The question is not whether the hand moved. It did. The question is not whether the drawings were accurate. They were. The only question that matters, is whose knowledge was being expressed. Because it was not hers. And if it was not hers, then we are forced to confront a possibility that neuroscience has no framework to accommodate. That skill, memory, and intention can exist independent of the brain that supposedly generates them." She speculated, cautiously, about quantum entanglement models of consciousness, the idea that information might be non-locally distributed, accessible under certain neurological conditions by minds that did not originally encode it. It is a theory, nothing more. But theories are what we build when the facts refuse to fit the world we thought we understood. So I leave you with this. If a hand can draw what the mind does not know, if fingers can move with a skill the body has never learned, then what does it mean to say that we are the authors of our own actions? What does it mean to say that we are alone inside our own skin? If this story unsettled you, if it made you think, then subscribe to Forgotten Dread Tales. Leave a comment and tell me whose hand was drawing. And if you wake one night and find a pencil in your fingers and a line on the page you do not remember making, do not look at what you have drawn. Not yet. Not until the light comes back.